Is Silvio Berlusconi losing his political grip? His candidates took a hammering in municipal elections in Italy. Then voters gave him a bloody nose in referendums on nuclear power, water privatization and judicial protection for ministers. My guest today, Emma Bonino, is a long-time radical opponent of Berlusconi and currently a vice president of the Italian Senate. Are conservative Italians, especially the men, now ready to embrace fundamental change? Emma Bonino, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you for the invitation.
Do you think the left, the centre-left at least, in Italy is getting a little overexcited about the political trouble that Berlusconi is in? The leader of the centre-left main party, Mr. Bersani, said that what's happening is tantamount to a divorce between Berlusconi and his people.
Well, what it's definitely clear is that many of people who voted for Berlusconi are not following his advice anymore. This is clear. But that this means that is a total divorce, it's too early to say. And I think that people who are went to the referendum are not voting for the left. They're simply, for the moment, saying, Berlusconi, look, enough is enough. We were waiting for reform, and frankly, you are not delivering, and there is this sort of paralysis in Italy, and so do something, I think. So I think it was a warning. That doesn't mean they will vote for the opposition next time immediately.
Well, that's an interesting point, and I want to talk more about the state of the opposition, but just to concentrate on Berlusconi for a moment, would you agree with me that he is pretty much the most resilient, maybe the most indestructible political leader in Europe?
In Europe nowadays, yeah, maybe yes. I thought you were comparing with others leaders in Italy, take Andreotti, 30 years.
No,
and
I'm looking around Europe of the last decade and looking at all the slings and the arrows that have been thrown Berlusconi's way, all of the crises that he's had to deal with, personal and political, and he has come through, and he may well come through again.
Well, I think he is a fighter. We should recognize it, and I think that we also we were not right in underestimating his capacity of resilience and of being a fighter. By the way, he has a means. He is the owner of all the private TV, plus the major part of the so-called public TV system. So he has the tool, let's say, to address people and to say what he wants. He never accepts, let's say, a contradiction in some way. But that also means that he is really not able to run a country. So he's a fighter, but he doesn't have evidently the patience, the stubbornness to run a country, to go for reform, which are painful, evidently. And so, again, he's very good in campaigning. He's not very good in running the policy.
Yes, well,
that's
interesting.
my opinion.
You say Berlusconi is not much good at running the country. Many Italians would say the same goes for the traditional leftist opposition, which is why Italy is in such a very big mess.
Which is true. And in a sense, I think that Berlusconi is much more the symptom than a cause.
So it's systemic. Italy's problems are systemic.
That's my analysis and the analysis of the Radical Party. We have been telling over and over again that the crisis in Italy goes back by 10 or 20, 30 years. And in fact, Berlusconi entered politics after the major scandal of clean hands, which means that democracy and the institution were not in good health, not even before.
No, and I frankly could say that you should know, because you've been part of the system. You talk about the Radical Party, of which you are, of course, a long-time leader, but the fact is the Radical Party doesn't get many votes, if we're honest about it.
No.
But the point is, you made decisions in your past to join hands with other members of a left-wing coalition. You were part of Prodi's government between 06 and 08. You've been a cabinet minister. You have been part of a system that has fundamentally failed the Italian people.
I think I agree in the sense that our ambition, and when I joined the cabinet, or I imposed myself, I was not very welcome, let's put it mildly, was in the hope to change really the institution and to put my country back to sort of a new respect of the rule of law.
And you failed.
And we failed. We failed, and in fact we got suicide. At a certain point we decided...
I'm not sure Mr. Prodi would quite describe it as suicide.
Well, I think that he knows that we were pushed to anticipate an election, and not only by the opposition at that time.
But isn't the fundamental problem for Italy today, and you've maybe alluded to it already, that even if people are fed up to the back teeth with the status quo, and maybe that means with Mr. Berlusconi, they see very few alternatives in mainstream politics?
Yeah, I think that, and they are right, by the way, because one of the issues is that the rule of law really does not exist anymore in my country. There is not a single piece of legislation which is implemented, particularly by people in power. Be it the electoral process, be it the justice system, really, and I think that this is where we have to start, and where people are really dreaming that we start again in constructing a sort of democratic alternative that is not there.
Sure, and that's a point about process, but it's also surely a question of personality. Where are the next generation of dynamic, charismatic, effective, efficient Italian leaders? I mean, sparing your blushes, I mean, you've been around a long time.
No, I'm not young.
Well, you look youngish, but you're not,
right.
You know, you're not the youngest politician in Italy, but the fact is you're still a very effective politician, and there aren't many young politicians in Italy that the Italian public can look to and say, I believe he or she can deliver change.
I think because the system does not allow newcomers very easily. We are not in the United States and the first system where you can see Obama or other. No, our system is not inclusive on newcomer, be it young or women. This is an old oligarch system which is very closed. And everybody's calling for change on Sunday conferences and so on, women and blah blah. But from Monday to Friday, when they get serious, look, they are not very inclusive.
Well, you talked about the gender issue. Why is it that in Italy today, only 46% of women are in the workforce?
Yes.
Why?
Well, that's it's not a bad invention of the last 2 years of Berlusconi. It comes from, it's a cultural issue in the sense that women are the Italian welfare, right? So they take care on their own of children, of old people, or sick people. There is no any kind of social structure, right? So they have many jobs.
Yeah, but you were trying to change this 3 and 4 decades ago. You were out there on the streets with a feminist movement. You were attacking the church on abortion, on divorce. I know, and you won some victories. And it looked then as though Italy really was changing. And I wonder why here we sit in 2011. And actually, Italy hasn't changed very much at all.
No, I think that the Italian women are as brilliant as the colleagues in Spain or France or etc. But the politics is the one that says the first priority for a woman is to be a mother, then to be a wife, then possibly also a lover, and possibly also, you know, to have some spare time to go out to work. So, but again, the Italian welfare means that all the tasks of assistance and care for the home, for the children, are done by the women.
Well, without wishing to be flippant about it, here is one of the most amazing statistics I've ever read. 95% of Italian men say they have never, ever operated a washing machine.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that, again, this is a question of...
That?
Well, I think, first of all, women should change how they really, with their son, because we are not... Sometimes we are the worst enemy of ourselves, just to begin with. But I also think that if we really allow women to access to the labor market and to have a career and etc., I think things can change. But the question is, nobody has the interest to change this situation except women.
50% of the population do, because 50% of the population are women.
But and we are trying, still trying now, but believe me, it's very difficult. And it's also true that after the radical victories on divorce and abortion and etc. in the 70s, in the 80s, the feminist movement in some way was co-opted by the traditional party and became quiet, let's say, or even more quiet.
Let's get back to the seismic sort of events of recent days in terms of the referendums. You've been a very active opponent of nuclear power in Italy. You must be delighted that the referendum overwhelmingly blew away any prospect of nuclear power in Italy for a long time to come. But the question is, So what? What are you going to do now? The plan was to have 25% of Italian power coming from nuclear by 2030.
No. It was 25% of electricity.
Well, of electricity, okay.
Which means 4% of the final use of energy, right?
Depends how you calculate it.
No, that's it. It's 4% as a total amount. And we have been without nuclear up to now, and basically that is not the major problem in my country.
Yeah, and you know how you've managed to deliver. You've delivered by becoming Europe's biggest importer of energy. 85% of Italian energy is imported, and you're so reliant on gas that, for example, your relationship with Putin's Russia is becoming very sensitive.
Yeah, but you know, the gas is not only used for electricity; it's used for many things, and not only to produce electricity.
I understand that, but
so
the
what
overall
I'm saying,
situation in Italy is surely not sustainable right now.
Exactly.
Partly thanks to your nuclear decision, you do not have a long-term sustainable energy policy.
Which is not true, but not because of the nuclear, in the sense that even if you go nuclear now, the first kilowatt will be in 2020 or 23, which is 10 years ahead. So what we do now, the fact is that we don't have at all any kind of efficiency policy, any kind of alternative policy. We have nothing. We don't have an energy policy. And I don't think that simply to go nuclear, 30 billion euro that the state doesn't have, for that result, I simply think that in cost and effects, it's not a sound economy.
Well, obviously there are many Italians who disagree. Economists, Mr. Tremonti. Obviously there are many Italians who disagree. Economists, Mr. Tremonti, and many others too, who say this is damaging to the Italian economy. But arguably there are even bigger problems you've got, which politicians have failed to address, which is basically a fundamental structural rigidity to your labor market, to bureaucracy, regulation, which means that, according to the World Bank, it's one of the worst places in the world to do business.
And I do agree, and I think that no one had the courage, not of these reforms, that don't have an economic cost, but in the short term, they have a major political cost, right? If you reform the labor market, of course, or the pension system, or the professionals, and professions rigidity, and you open up, of course, maybe in the short term you have some political cost. And that is also one of the reasons why this reform have not been done by the left, but not even by the right, which was exactly the program of Berlusconi when he stepped in 96, and he didn't deliver, but 96 was 7 months. But then he resumed power in 2001 for 5 years, and no reform, no liberalization to be seen.
Maybe it's too easy to blame the politicians in Italy. Maybe, in the end, this is something about the Italian public. You're one of the most innately conservative, with a small c, nations inside Europe.
Well, but I really don't think so. People and public opinion are not as, well, they are reacting to the message that they receive, evidently, and maybe, yes, they don't like change very much. And in this time of let's say, economic crisis, you know, the threats and fear are there, so the calling for protection is the easiest way to go. And you don't have, frankly, a sort of leadership, not only in politics, in any field, that simply are able or even willing to risk to lose the election, to say people the simple truth. Listen, this system is not only undemocratic, not only there is no rule of law, but on top of that, it's not sustainable.
But with respect, there you go, sort of saying if only politicians would present this truth to the public, they'd vote for it. But you've tried to present what you call the truth to the public, and frankly, they haven't voted for you. In fact, during the last set of elections, you did very badly.
Yeah,
so,
which is true.
So let's get to the heart of what I see as the problem for you in Italy, which is you work in a democratic system. You've always called yourself an absolute believer in democracy, but democracy delivers things in Italy you don't like. And if we think particularly now about the immigration issue and Italians' view of immigration and foreigners, you are swimming against the tide of public opinion.
Well, it's not new, and
but it's a problem for a Democrat.
All right, but I challenge your analysis. I don't think my country is a democratic system anymore, and since a long time. Democracy means the separation of power. Democracy means checks and balance. Democracy means rule of law. Democracy means also the right of information and let's say, debate, right? All this has disappeared since a long time.
Well, I
we are
take
living
your
in a
point
different
about
system.
a particular media organization in Italy, but are you suggesting to me that when opinion polls consistently over months and years show between 60 and 80% of Italians are fearful of the impact of immigration and believe there are too many immigrants in their country, are you suggesting to me that doesn't really represent the
No,
democratic feeling of the country?
It does at this stage, but it also does because there was no possibility of a real debate and telling people also the other side of the story of immigration, which is written in a very small notes in the paper of the government, who said, the government, Tremonti and Maroni, said to people, wait, Italy needs at least 250,000 more immigrants per year in the next 10 years, makes 2,500,000. But they wrote this to Brussels. They didn't tell it to people.
Well, with respect, I think that message has gone out to the Italian people. They're very well aware that they've got falling birth rates, they've got a falling population, and they somehow are going to have to find new young workers.
Exactly.
Italians know that, but aren't you being a bit patronizing, suggesting that maybe if Italians were told more, given more information, they'd suddenly welcome immigration?
No, but maybe they will not be
evidence.
60%. Maybe there will be a real debate what democracy is. A real different option and not only a one way of thinking.
Put it this way, the latest figures from Milan, I believe, suggest that 16% of the population of the city is now not Italian, is immigrant, 208,000 people. Do you believe that Italians should welcome that?
No, but it's a fact of reality. The question is that if we start of accepting what is the reality, then we can invent a policy of integration. But if the message is everybody out, we don't want any more, we will kick everybody out, then you don't invent any sort of policy. You are quoting Milan. I was campaigning there. Now, the major debate of having 300,000 people and et cetera, was will they have a new mosque, a mosque?
Yeah, big debate about whether there should officially be a mosque in Milan.
Why not? I mean, where do we presume that these people who have the right to pray will go? Al Duomo or where? And the right and the Lega Nord were just campaigning and saying, no, never. They will never have a place where to pray.
Emma Bonino, you're building an argument here which suggests to me there's something special about Italy, and the reason why Italy has such a problem with immigration is because our political system is so dysfunctional. But look around you. You're on the Council of Europe. You've just written a report about discrimination and prejudice across Europe. Look at the political reality across Europe.
Which is so.
From the Netherlands to Denmark to Sweden to Finland to Hungary. I could name a whole list of more countries where the far right and anti-immigration parties are on the rise.
Absolutely. And I think that our responsibility has always been also not to dare to be vocal enough to counter argument what are some populist slogans.
Yeah, but
you are totally right. You are totally right. There is a wave.
This can't be just to do with the Italian media, the lack of debate. This is a debate across Europe which is being had, and which Europeans are saying, we've had enough of this immigration, we're worried about the impact it's having on our society.
And I think that they are right to be worried about the impacts, but nevertheless, we will need immigrants more and more at European level, by tens of millions, as it is, I mean, the last report. So we will better have the courage to say, people, maybe you don't like the situation, but the question is that we are aging, we are becoming less and less, and older and older. So diversity is our destiny. We will better sit down and invent a sort of integration policy with all the problems that it gives.
Yes, but the problem is, at the moment, you can't win elections with that message. Democracy speaks, and democracy speaks at the moment in the direction of supporting a tougher line on immigration.
That's all right, but if you don't start inserting other point of view, we will never win, and who will win is simply the populist, let's say, political organization, who, by the way, will have to receive immigrants without proper preparation.
Well, we'll talk about that because
point.
In your report for the Council of Europe, you say, for example, that governments across Europe should, quote, seek alternatives to detention for asylum seekers. But, of course, you know that when Italy recently gave a whole host of temporary residence permits to North Africans and Africans who'd come from Tunisia in the boats after the Arab Spring, you know that those people tried to get into France immediately, many of them, because they were Tunisians, they had family. The French blocked them.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with the asylum proper procedures.
But it has a lot to do with the way in which
that
Europe coordinates its policy on immigration and indeed asylum too.
No, the asylum, in Italy we don't even have a law on asylum. Right? So the temporary protection was to facilitate them to go to France.
Yeah, but you see my point. I mean, without going into the detail of asylum,
I see your point.
What we have now is a Europe that is fragmenting
Absolutely.
and looking after its own interests on
Absolutely.
a nation-by-nation basis. And you, as one of the great sort of supporters of more, ever closer union in Europe, must find this very troubling.
No, and I think it's a really big mistake that we Europeans will pay really at a very high cost in a few years' time. And just for fear of 25,000 Tunisians, imagine the difference in atmosphere. During the Kosovo crisis, we received 70,000 without any kind of major crisis.
Well, Mr.
Right?
Frattini, who sat in that chair not long ago representing your government, said it's not just about 25,000. Imagine how many more tens of thousands will come if they see that they can make a new life for themselves.
So what are we
in
going to bomb them in the Mediterranean or what? Or are we not better off sitting and see what is happening in the South Mediterranean, where there is a demographic bomb, and in the North Mediterranean, where we are in need of people? Maybe there is a policy to invent there, not simply bombing Schengen, because that is the result is that one of the treaty...
Schengen is under threat. The freedom of movement across the European Union is under threat.
So the only result has been to undermine one of the major points of the European construction. And I think that people don't realize that we don't have other option if not Europe, right? And we will better really strengthen the European project and revitalize it with a sort of a vision.
Well, you say that, but sitting in Italy, which has its own economic problems, including a national debt of 115% of GDP, are you really confident that when we discuss the euro, for example, Europe is capable of strengthening its institutions?
Well, I just tell my people, imagine if we were not in the euro zone, but with our lira. I don't know, I cannot even imagine where we will be.
No, the Germans might want to imagine where they would be.
Exactly, but not not Italians, let's say.
No, but that again is the point.
Again,
you, as a long-time supporter of the federalist principle, are in trouble right now.
No.
Europe isn't going in your direction.
Oh, that's it. But the question that Europe has never become a federalist or the United States of Europe, and that is one of the major issues in the sense that our weakness is much more political than simply financial. If you take California or Illinois, they are in a worse shape, economically speaking, than Portugal or Greece. But they are not under political threat of dollars and whatsoever.
That's arguable, but we don't have time for that. But what we do have time for is a final thought. Italy, at the beginning of the European Union's history, was a very important player at the heart of the Union. These days, frankly, it doesn't feel that way. Do you see any possibility that Italy can regain a leadership role in Europe?
Well, I hope so. But Italy is also a symptom of how bad is the situation in Europe in some way. It's also a symptom of a crisis in a liberal democracy and in democracy in general in the European region.
And if you're talking symptoms, is this an illness that's going to get worse? Or is it going to get better?
Listen, I think that if we don't do nothing, it will get worse, of course. But I'm still hopeful that with determination and with vision and calling on people when they have the possibility in my country, they react, right? And so I think that the real point is that in my country what is collapsing is the system. But luckily enough, we still have people who can really follow somebody or some ideas. So I'm confident.
We'll leave it there. Emma Bonino, thank you very much for being on Hardtalk.
Thank you.
Thank you.